Canada's leaders promised a bold stand, a patriotic boycott of American food imports. They said it would be temporary. They said it would show Trump who's boss. But within weeks, the cracks are impossible to ignore. Grocery shelves are thinning out. Prices are spiking. Meat alone has jumped 16%. And then came the scandal that blew the lid off this so-called strategy. Viral photos of uncovered meat stuffed in a rental truck behind an Ontario store. Health officials rushed to downplay it, but the images went everywhere. Families are asking, if this is the cost of defying Trump, who's really paying the price? Ordinary Canadians one grocery bill away from crisis. This wasn't just bad policy, it's humiliation on a national scale. And Mark Carney is right in the middle of it. Like and subscribe and keep watching, because what comes next will shock you. The boycott didn't come out of nowhere. Ottawa pitched it as a patriotic strike back against Trump's tariffs, a way to prove Canada could stand on its own 2 feet. Officials wrapped it in national pride, calling it a sacrifice worth making to defend sovereignty. But peel back the slogan, and you find something far uglier, a government gambling with the country's food supply to score political points. At first, it sounded manageable. Temporary, they said, just a few months of higher costs, while Canada leaned more on domestic producers. Politicians lined up to smile in front of cameras, insisting this was the moment to support Canadian farmers. But that's not how markets work. You don't just rip out the United States, the world's largest food exporter, from the equation and expect smooth sailing. Within weeks, the effects became impossible to ignore. Grocery bills crept higher. Families who were already stretched thin suddenly saw staples like bread, produce, and dairy inching up in price. Then came the hammer, meat. Imports cut off, domestic processors overwhelmed, and suddenly Canadians were paying 16% more for chicken, beef, and pork. A summer barbecue turned into a luxury event. For families in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, the sticker shock was bad enough. But in smaller towns, where wages are lower and options fewer, it was devastating. And just when the government insisted everything was under control, reality came crashing in. Photos surfaced online showing raw meat piled in the back of a rental truck behind a grocery store in Ontario. No refrigeration, no packaging, just slabs of beef baking in the summer heat. The pictures went viral within hours, and outrage exploded. Health officials scrambled to calm the storm, claiming the meat had been inspected and cleared. But the damage was done. Once the public sees images like that, trust evaporates. Canadians weren't just questioning one delivery, they were questioning the entire system. If this is what's passing inspection, critics asked, how many corners are being cut behind closed doors? Opposition parties pounced, framing the scandal as proof the boycott was reckless from the start. Food safety, affordability, and availability, 3 pillars of public confidence, were suddenly in doubt, and Ottawa had no convincing answer. Instead, Mark Carney doubled down, dismissing the scandal as a distraction while defending the boycott as the price of independence. Independence? Try incompetence. Meanwhile, families were living the fallout in real time. Price hikes weren't a statistic. They were the difference between full meals and skipped ones. In Aurora, one food bank reported that 31% of the population had turned to assistance, with half of them holding full-time jobs. Let that sink in. People working 40 hours a week couldn't afford groceries in one of the wealthiest countries on earth. Food banks rationed portions, cutting back on fresh items to stretch supplies. Volunteers said they'd never seen demand this high, and it was only getting worse. The boycott had unleashed a domino effect. Trucking companies, suppliers, and small retailers were all caught in the squeeze. Farmers faced surging demand, but lacked the capacity to scale up overnight. The result? Shortages, substitution, and corners being cut. Exactly the kind of conditions that breed scandals like the viral meat truck. And through it all, Carney acted as if this chaos was proof of resilience. He called it a bold stand against Trump's tariffs. But ask the single mother in Calgary staring at a doubled grocery bill if she feels resilient. Ask the family in Winnipeg who just waited 3 hours at a food bank if they feel proud of Ottawa's so-called strategy. This wasn't resilience. It was self-inflicted harm disguised as patriotism. And the scandal was just the beginning. Because what came next exposed an even deeper crisis, one that stretched far beyond grocery stores. If the viral meat scandal was the spark, the firestorm that followed revealed the true scale of the crisis. Canadians weren't just angry about food safety, they were furious about being misled. The government had promised that the boycott would be a patriotic stand, a temporary inconvenience. Instead, it turned into a rolling disaster, with every headline piling more pressure onto households already drowning in costs. Public reaction was swift and brutal. Call-in shows were flooded with voices demanding answers. How do you tell a family living paycheck to paycheck that they need to pay 16% more for meat in the name of independence? Opposition leaders seized the moment. They hammered Carney in Parliament, accusing him of weaponizing food supply for political theater. "This is not sovereignty," one MP said. "This is sabotage." Even premiers from Carney's own political allies started breaking ranks. Doug Ford demanded Ottawa drop the boycott, warning that Ontario families couldn't survive another month of this policy. Western provinces, already skeptical of federal overreach, called the boycott an outright betrayal of rural Canadians. Carney's response: more stubborn defiance. He brushed aside the criticism, claiming that short-term pain would lead to long-term gain. But ordinary Canadians weren't buying it. You can lecture about resilience from a podium in Ottawa. You can't convince a mother who just cut meals from her kids' plates that she's part of some noble sacrifice. The numbers told the story better than any speech. A 3–5% overall grocery price hike may not sound catastrophic to elites, but on the ground it translated into families skipping meals, students eating less, and seniors forced to choose between heating bills and food. Add in the meat spike, 16% in just weeks, and the picture was undeniable. This wasn't temporary pain. It was a structural breakdown in affordability. Food banks bore the brunt. In communities like Aurora, nearly 1 in 3 people relied on aid. Half of those walking through the doors weren't unemployed. They were full-time workers, unable to keep up with runaway prices. Volunteers described families breaking down in tears, ashamed yet desperate. Shelves emptied faster than they could be stocked. And the chilling reality? Demand was only growing. Instead of easing the pressure, Ottawa made things worse by bragging about billions spent on housing aid and encampment cleanups. But Canadians saw the disconnect. What good is a subsidy check if it doesn't cover the basics, like food on the table? Encampments weren't shrinking. They were expanding. Homelessness wasn't falling. It was rising. The so-called safety net had gaping holes, and families were slipping straight through. And all of this chaos was playing out against a sharp contrast south of the border. While Canada fumbled with boycotts and scandals, Trump's America was booming. U.S. shelves were full. Prices were stable. Energy and manufacturing surged under tariffs designed to force production back home. The White House framed Canada's struggles as proof of weak leadership, and the optics were brutal. The comparison was impossible to ignore. On one side, Trump flexing economic muscle, telling the world America is open for business. On the other, Carney presiding over shortages, scandals, and spiraling costs. For Canadians, the humiliation cut deep. Their leaders had promised strength but delivered weakness, and the political fallout was just beginning. Polls showed plummeting trust in Ottawa, with approval ratings for Carney sinking by the week. Protesters began gathering outside grocery stores demanding accountability. Farmers warned that without imported stability, domestic supply chains would collapse under the strain. The message from the ground was clear. This wasn't a patriotic stand anymore. It was a ticking time bomb. The boycott had started as a weapon against Trump's tariffs, but by the fall of 2025, it had become a weapon aimed squarely at Canadians themselves. And with every empty shelf and every viral scandal, the backlash grew louder, setting the stage for a political reckoning unlike anything Ottawa had faced in years. Because what came next wasn't just about food, it was about trust, power, and survival. So here we are. A government that promised strength but delivered shortages. A boycott that was supposed to punish Trump but instead punished Canadians. And a scandal that turned patriotism into a punchline. The truth is simple. Ottawa played politics with food, and ordinary families are the ones paying the price. Mark Carney can keep pretending this is resilience. He can stand behind podiums and lecture about sacrifice. But Canadians know better. They see the empty shelves. They feel the price hikes. They're the ones lining up at food banks while their leaders shrug off responsibility. And every week this continues, trust in Ottawa sinks lower. If you think this crisis is far from over, you're right. The backlash has only begun, so what do you think? Has Canada's boycott already crossed the line into self-destruction? Drop your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep watching.